Miss Granger, do we need to take note?
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna set you loose on set you free from taking notes for this one. But that's a great question, Jules. Thank you. No, just listen and watch. I would rather you just focus this time on just listening. Okay, so the definition of the principles of design, they're really a set of compositional guidelines. So a composition is how you arrange the elements in a work of art. So a work of art could take up the space of a canvas, it could take up the space of a sculpture, so it's three-dimensional, it's sitting on a pedestal. It could take up the space of a whole room if it's an installation. So we use these set of guidelines to help us arrange the elements of art and create certain principles. So some of the principles are balance, variety, contrast, movement, rhythm and pattern, which are different but they go together, unity, emphasis, and scale and proportion. So let's talk about each one and look at examples of them. So balance is the arrangement of the elements of art within an artwork that create a sense of stability and equality. So balance is really pleasing to the eye and to humans because it is kind of part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. We are balanced. We look at our bodies. We're symmetrical, fairly symmetrical. So we kind of seek that out in art. It calms us. It soothes us. It interests us. So, but there's different types of balance. Balance can be radial, so it can start from the center and kind of spiral out. We see this in a lot of architecture, and we also see it in nature. We see symmetrical balance, so this Mexican Tree of Life sculpture is a really good example of symmetrical balance. It's almost the same on both sides. There is an Adam and Eve in this one, so that's probably the only difference in this sculpture. So imagine something that is symmetrically balanced. If you drew a line down the center and you folded it in half, it would be the same on both sides. And then something that is asymmetrically balanced. This is probably the hardest one to figure out. It means that they're different on both sides, but it still feels balanced. So in order to understand that, we have to pay attention to something called visual weight. So what does it mean to have visual weight? Well, really what that means is our eye goes to it. We are attracted to it. We want to look at it first. It's heavy when we want to look at it first. So it has visual weight. Okay, so what gives things visual weight? Well, contrast. So like when you guys want to answer this question for me verbally, what does your eye go to first in this work of art?
Like her back, how it's like kind of leaning back, but still staying up.
Okay, so the angle of her back is what your eye goes to first? Okay, anybody else have something different that they look at first?
The first thing that my eye goes to is kind of her dress, because I can tell if those are like circles or maybe crescent moons on her dress.
Mm-hmm.
But she also kind of looks maybe sad.
Okay, so you look at her face.
Yeah, I look at her face and her dress.
Okay.
She kind of looks sad.
Okay, she has a sadness to her. Yeah, so we're human, and our human nature, we look for human qualities that echo ourselves, right? So if there's a human in the painting, we're going to look for that human first, and we're going to maybe look at the face to try to read the emotion, because that's what we do in real life, right? The first thing we usually do when we see a person is we look at their face and we try to figure out what is the emotion they're experiencing right now. So, and also because of contrast, right? Her skin is very light and it's up against this darker scarf that she has kind of blowing around her. And then somebody else mentioned pattern. So we see pattern on her dress, which is also attractive to the eye. There's a lot of flowy lines in this artwork. The creases in her scarf and the way that it's kind of blowing over her head, the angle of her arm, the flow of her dress. It's all very balanced. So we can talk more about what that means later. It's something you have to kind of learn through looking at art. I'm not going to dig into the history of this too much because I don't think we have time, but this is a really good example of symmetrical balance in architecture. So why do you think bridges, this is the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, Why do you think bridges have to be symmetrically balanced? Any guesses?
Bridge will fall
The bridge will fall, exactly.
and collapse.
It will collapse. So it is an architectural necessity that that bridge is symmetrically balanced, at least in its structure. It might have decorative elements to it that are not symmetrically balanced, like, for example, the New Bay Bridge in San Francisco. It has all these cables coming up and going, swooping down in interesting ways. But that is somewhat decorative, right? It's still balanced. But the Brooklyn Bridge is a really good example of the same on both sides. If we drew a line down the middle, which you can actually see, because that's the pathway over the bridge if you're walking along the bridge. I've been across the Brooklyn Bridge. I rode my bike over it once with a friend. You go down the middle here. So it's the same on both sides. Here's some examples of artwork that have some asymmetrical balance. This artist's name is Alexander Calder. If you have ever gone to the Modern Art Museum in San Francisco, there's a whole room full of his giant mobiles. So a mobile is sort of a hanging sculpture that is visually weighted and physically weighted to balance and kind of move and not collapse. So the piece on the left here is a really good example of visual weight. You see this dark dot? That is physically heavy enough to hold all of this up and balance it. But it's also visually heavy because it's a black dot and our eye goes to it. So these are examples of physical and visual asymmetrical balance. This is an Aztec calendar stone or a sunstone, and it's representing the solar deity in the center. But you can see that it radiates out from the center. There are rows that represent different months and years and days and events and symbols in this Aztec calendar, and it radiates out from the center. All right, so the next principle of design is called variety. Variety is created when more than two different elements are used or combined in an artwork to create visual balance. So we like variety, right? We don't like always the same thing. I mean, would you want to eat oatmeal for breakfast every day of your life? Probably not. You want some variety in your life. So it's artists and people that look at art also need variety. So we can have variety of a lot of things. We can have variety of color, variety of line, variety of shape, variety of pattern, really variety of everything. So what is one element of art that you see a variety in when you look at this painting? Remember, our elements are color, line, shape, value, form, texture, and space.
Line and shape, I think.
Line and shape. Yeah, we see a variety of line. So we see some thinner lines and some thicker lines and some dotted lines. And then shape. We see lots of organic shapes of different sizes. Can you name one more element of art that we see a variety of in here? There's a really obvious one.
Color.
Color, right. And we're seeing mostly primary colors here in black. So red, blue, and yellow, and black and white. And the background is kind of a stampy green color. All right, contrast is the next principle of design. I love this one. This one I think is fun to play with. When elements in an artwork are in opposition to each other, so this opposition creates visual emphasis and interest in the work. So when you put two things next to each other that are really different, our eye goes to that. We look at it. So an example of that might be color. So here we have a Rembrandt portrait, and we see a really bright highlight on one side and a dark shadow on the other side. And he's actually famous for creating this sort of intense dark and light in a painting. It's called chiaroscuro. And you even see this in photography. If you're a photographer and you're studying studio lighting, there's even something called Rembrandt lighting, where you try to get this triangle of light under the cheek. So he made this very famous, very popular. You can see contrast in texture. So an example would be this Anish Kapoor sculpture. What does this look like to you? Any guesses?
It looks like a blood drop or something.
Yeah, it looks kind of, well, it's red, right? And it's shiny and it's sort of dripping. So it could be a drop of blood or it could be a drop of some type of liquid. And what is the contrast that we see in this sculpture in terms of texture? What is the texture of the drop? Throw out some adjectives that describe the texture of the drop. It's smooth, right. And then the wall, the brick wall, is what in terms of texture?
Rough.
Rough, right? So there's the contrast, smooth against rough, okay? And then we can also have a contrast of form. This is a sculpture by an artist named Louise Nevelson, and she used to use a bunch of mixed, well, I wouldn't say mixed media, scraps from a furniture factory. And she would glue them all and nail them all together in these sculptures and then paint them one color. This piece is called The Wedding because it's white, probably. But we don't see a variety of color here, or contrast of color. We see a contrast of form. So we see circles next to straight lines and geometric forms. All right, the next one is movement. Movement is achieved by the arrangement of art elements in a way that makes the eye follow a path through the composition. So we want the artwork to tell a story. We want our eye to move through the artwork. And artists have a lot of control over how that happens. So let's look at this Frank Stella painting down below. We talked about him in our featured artist of the week yesterday. So when we look at this artwork, where does your eye go to first?
I don't know if it's just me, but like I saw through the middle and went to like all the squares like through the middle instead of like one.
So you just kind of sucked it in the middle first and then you went through all of them? Okay, so that might have to do with the fact that it's symmetrically balanced and we're drawn to the middle of that. Did anyone else's eye go somewhere else besides the middle first? Well,
Color.
The color. So your eye is drawn to the color. So maybe the brightest colors? Yeah. Well, I personally, my eye is drawn to this black shape in the green. There's something very high contrast to me about the black and the green that's very different from the rest of it. And so I kind of go there first. This piece over here, this is a painting by an artist named Marcel Duchamp, and it's called Nude Descending a Staircase. So what do you think this is a painting of? I mean, it's in the title, but what's happening to this figure?
It's like they're moving without actually moving.
They're moving?
Oh yeah, it's like if you go really fast, you can see figures on the side, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like frame. It's like frame picture or whatever. Like what they use for Disney. Like they use like, instead of like drawing on animated before that, they had like a bunch of pieces of paper to animate it.
Yeah. So
Kinda
it's like a
that.
stop motion animation where there's a lot of figures moving really quickly to create movement. That's really perceptive, you guys, and that's exactly what it is. It's one person walking down a staircase, and they're swinging their arms and their legs, their calves are running down the staircase, and they might even be like tilting their head. So this is the head, this is the torso, these are the arms, the hips, the thighs, the calves, and there's not really feet, it's more like just lines here. But so there's a lot of ways that you can create movement in a work of art. Rhythm and pattern is the next one, and this is a really fun one to play with if you're an artist. And you see pattern everywhere you go. You see it in nature, you see it in the media that you consume. You see it in your clothes, you see it everywhere. So rhythm is a planned movement within an artwork. It may be created by using patterns or repetition. Pattern is the repetition of the elements of art. Patterns can create pleasing rhythms. So that is a complicated definition. But basically we're saying that when you repeat something, it creates a pattern. And when you repeat that pattern, it can create a rhythm. It's kind of like in music, you know, if you created a rhythm and then you repeated it, okay, or you created a pattern and then you repeated it, you're making a rhythm. So we see this in visual art as well. We see lots of repetition here in this Frank Gehry building of this ribbon shape, and it's moving through space and it's creating a rhythm, a visual rhythm. In this artwork here, this is M.C. Escher, and we see this repetition of this fish, and the fact that it's really close together, all of a sudden we see in the negative space, what do we see emerge?
Birds.
Birds, right. So, but the farther away the fish are spaced, the less we can see that bird shape. But the closer they get, then all of a sudden the birds appear. And he was a master at doing illustrations like this. But there was always a pattern and a rhythm to his art. And then we have Gustav Klimt over here, who used to paint with gold leaf. All this gold is actual gold leaf. And we see this beautiful pattern in her cape and her dress. We see lots of shapes, triangles, and we see eyeballs and circles and lots of really beautiful things. Okay, unity is the quality achieved when elements of art and principles of design function together and support each other. So how do we unify a work of art? Well, we can use repetition. We just talked about repetition in pattern. So this is kind of a creepy example, but I like to show it because it's surprising to most sixth graders to see that this is artwork. But this is an installation, and the artist created these people made out of, they're cast people. They're made out of resin. These are not real people. And all of these cats are also cast out of resin. The furniture is all real. It's all painted gray, and they're in this space together. And what do you see a repetition of in this image? What do you see multiples of in this image here?
Green cats.
A lot of green cats. What feeling does this artwork give you? Confusion. Like, what is happening in this space? What other questions do you have about it?
To me, it feels like they like cats around, where there's a lot of cats, like a cat lady or cat people.
Like a cat people, yeah. But has it gone a little bit out of control, maybe? I can't hear the person talking. I think your audio is a little bit off. Oh, Giselle, I think your audio isn't working. You could put it in the chat. So yeah, there's a repetition of, and they're all painted green. So that kind of unifies the artwork. I think I need Giselle, I think I need you to mute yourself. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. And then I'm hearing myself talk back at me because there's a lag. Okay, perfect. So we see repetition of cats, which creates unity. All right, I need to investigate and figure out who I need to mute here. Did we figure it out? Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. If you want to share your thoughts on that, you can put it in the chat. All right, so we just have one or two more. So we can also group things together to make them feel unified. So put them in groups. Emphasis. Emphasis is the area or areas of an artwork that are the focal point. It's what we look at first. So the emphasis really dominates our attention. Like, we want to look at it first. So an example of emphasis is this famous painting by Botticelli. It's called The Birth of Venus, and we really look to her first because she's isolated and she's in the center and she's in this beautiful seashell. And all of the other characters and figures are sort of floating towards her. We also can see emphasis in contrast. So when we look at this famous painting by Vermeer called The Girl with the Pearl Earring, which you might have seen before, we see a lot of contrast in this painting. Our eye goes to the pearl because it's white and it's surrounded by black shadow. Our eye also goes to the color of her scarf, that blue, it's all in highlight. And it also goes to kind of the white of her eyes and the highlight on the side of her face. And then what does our eye go to with this painting by Magritte? What do you see first when you stare at this painting?
I see apple with the leaves hanging off of it because I think my eye looks at that first because it's an illusion.
Because it's an illusion, right? So we see the apple floating, and does it look like he's like biting the apple, or is it stranger than that? It's not like he's in its mouth. It's sort of just floating in front of his face, and it's blocking all of his features. And it's an illusion. Jules is totally right about that. It's an illusion, or it's fantasy, right? So Rene Magritte was a surrealist, someone that painted their dreams a lot and their imagination. Okay, this is the last one, scale and proportion. Scale is the overall size of the artwork or objects in the artwork, and the proportion is the size of the artwork or the size of the objects in the artwork compared to each other. So this one's a little bit confusing, but this is how I can kind of break it down for you. So if you're trying to realistically draw or sculpt a human figure in their face, if the eyes are the right size in relation to the nose and the mouth and the ears and the rest of the body, then that figure is in proportion. If you're trying to draw a cartoon of that human and you want to exaggerate things or make things bigger, like an example of this would be a lot of cartoon characters have bigger eyes than humans have, then those features would be out of proportion because we're talking about the human, right? And then scale is how big is it or how small is it? What is the scale? So this sculptor is a really good example of that. His name is Ron Mueck, and he sculpts these figures in all different sizes. So see this boy here? This boy is gigantic. This is a real human staring at this sculpture. He makes these using computer programs, steel structures, lots of like computer generated construction to make these happen. And he also makes these tiny little figures. This is the artist himself, and he's working on this figure here. So you can see how tiny they are. So the scale of this sculpture on the right is large, and the scale of the sculptures on the left are small in relation to human scale. Okay, so what are we doing for this? This is a short assignment. It shouldn't take you too long to do. It's not something you should stress out about. It's just something fun to explore balance. So I'm choosing one principle of design for you, and I'm choosing balance. And I want you to also deal with form. So form is the three-dimensional element of art. So it's not shape, it's form. So you're going to be making a little sculpture. So I want you to choose, though, between symmetrical, asymmetrical, or radial balance. So remember, balance was our very first principle. You can go back to the slide and remind yourself of the difference between those three. I'd like you to use a flat piece of paper and tape together a form that demonstrates your type of balance. So don't worry about, like how good it looks in terms of like you cut into it or you ripped it or whatever. You can take a piece of paper. I want you to just take one piece of paper or a couple pieces of paper and tape. And I want you to rip your paper, roll your paper, crinkle it up, open it back up again. Play around with it until you come up with a form that you think demonstrates either symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, or radial balance. Okay, and it has to be a form. It can't be sitting flat on the table to be a shape. You have to make it a sculpture. Okay? So questions you might ask yourself. Jules, would you mind typing your question in the chat for me? Okay, so questions that you can ask yourself to achieve a successful design. How can I experiment first to discover the form that works? So you can take several pieces of paper and you can just play for a while until you discover what you want to do. So you don't have to turn in the first thing you make. Is it interesting from all sides? Okay, remember it's a sculpture, so it doesn't have a front. You have to look at it from all sides. And what do you need to achieve this type of form you chose? So keep it simple, keep it abstract, same as the other project. We're not doing animals or figures or sunsets or rainbows or hearts or anything. We're doing a really abstract art here. Pure form, pure balance. All you need is paper. It can be printer paper, it doesn't have to be special paper. I would not use the special papers I gave you for class for this. I would use something different if you have it. Tape, scissors. If you don't have scissors, just rip the paper. And you don't have to paint it if you don't want to. If you want to, that's cool. But it can just be white paper as well. All right, so do I have any questions about this?